They said the sky split the night she was born. Not with thunder, but with a silence so deep it swallowed the cries of the midwife. A red moon hung low, swollen and watching, and the eastern ridge caught fire without a spark. The villagers closest to the mountain swore they saw the flames twist into the shape of a woman kneeling, her hair like smoke, her hands buried in ash. That same night, a child was born in the southern foothills, and her first breath smelled of scorched cedar. Her mother did not scream in labor, her voice had been gone for days. The wind had stolen it. Or perhaps she had given it away to protect the child inside her. Either way, when the baby emerged there was no crying. No sound at all. Only a stare, wide and unblinking, as though the child had come into the world already knowing what the world would do to her. They named her in secret, away from the council's ears. Names had weight here, weight enough to break stone. To speak a name was to summon its meaning. So her mother whispered the name only once into the hollow of the child's throat, sealing it there like a prayer. No ink, no scroll, no record, only breath. But secrets, like sparks, never stay buried for long. By the time the child was 3, strange things had begun. A goat, startled by her laughter, leapt from a cliff but landed unbroken. Rain would stop mid-fall when she walked beneath it. Her eyes seemed to darken when someone lied near her. And once, only once, when a boy called her cursed and struck her with a branch, the bark curled black in his hand, and his tongue stilled for 3 days. The elders began to watch her from a distance. They did not speak of it at first, only exchanged glances when the wind changed suddenly or when the fire refused to light in the hearth. But behind closed doors, in the stone chamber beneath the temple of knowing, they named her. Not the name her mother had given. That name remained hidden. They gave her a different name, Omen. It was not a word spoken aloud, not at first. But it spread. From priest to scribe. From merchant to hunter. Children whispered it like a dare, like a spell, afraid it might turn on them if said too loud. Her mother tried to protect her, kept her inside, taught her how to silence her steps, how to breathe so quietly the air forgot she was there. But the girl was not made for hiding. Even the dirt seemed to tremble under her feet. At 6, she walked through the old stone orchard and left black footprints in the frost. At 7, she stood before a councilman's tent and said, "You speak of fire as if it fears you. But it remembers who lit it first." That same night, lightning struck the tent, even though no storm touched the sky. The council called it coincidence. Then they called it prophecy. And then they called it danger. They summoned the mother, brought her before the scroll. The great scroll of names was unrolled across the high altar, its surface gleaming with the ink of thousands, all who had ever been born within the kingdom's reach. The names shimmered when touched by light, each one bound to blood, bound to memory. But hers was not there. "You dare keep her nameless?" the high priest asked. "She is not nameless," the mother replied, eyes wet but steady. "She is named in breath, in shadow, in the old way." The scroll shivered. "Speak it," the priest demanded. No. The girl stood outside the temple that day watching the sky. She did not cry. She did not move. But the wind came and wrapped around her like a cloak. And the fire returned to the ridge. That night the council voted. Not openly but in the hidden chamber under the temple. The kind of vote where no one writes their names. The kind that burns after it is cast. "She must be taken," they said. "Not killed." The scroll would never forgive that. But sealed. Moved to the edge. Where even her breath cannot reach us. The girl was 8 when they came for her. They did not bind her. They did not need to. She walked beside them, eyes wide, silent. Her mother was not allowed to follow. Only a goodbye whispered against the wind. The edge of the kingdom was a place most forgot. A cold stretch of land where the stones hummed with old magic. There, in a circle of burned trees, they left her. The watchers who remained were forbidden to speak to her. She was given food, water, and nothing else. No fire. No ink. No voice. But even silence has its own language. She carved with stone. Not words, images. Swirls. Spirals. Flames that curled into eyes. Birds with wings made of teeth. She sang without sound, humming through her bones. And the wind began to listen. Years passed. The kingdom forgot. Or they tried to. When her name was finally spoken again, it was not by accident. A boy, the son of a scroll keeper, found her story among the faded edge maps of the southern books. He asked his teacher who she was. The teacher said nothing. But the wind picked up. And the candle at the desk flickered in a room with no draft. The boy whispered the name to himself just once. The sky cracked. Not with sound. With knowing. He fell ill that night, not with fever but with dreams. Fire walking on two legs. A woman standing at the heart of a mountain. Her name written across the stars. He woke crying. Not in fear. In reverence. He was the first to remember. But not the last. Within a year, children across the kingdom began dreaming of her. Their tongues could not hold her name, it was too large. But they drew her. In ash. In dust. In the margins of schoolbooks. Always the same, a figure in flame, her eyes open, her mouth silent. The elders grew restless. The scroll keepers checked the great scroll again. And though no one had touched it, a single curl of ink had begun to form at the bottom. A shape. Not yet a letter. But not nothing. She is returning, one of them whispered. No, said the high priest. She was never gone. There is an old law in this kingdom, older than the kingdom itself, whispered even before the hills had names. It says that to speak a name is to summon a soul, and to write it is to anchor that soul to the world. It is why, from the moment a child is born, their name is taken by the scribes and carved into the great scroll, a living record, endless and ancient, said to be inked in the blood of the first fire god and bound in a hide that does not age. The scroll lies beneath the temple of knowing, in a chamber lit only by the breath of candles that never die. To touch the scroll is a sacred rite. To alter it, even with permission, is rare. It is said that the scroll remembers every stroke, even the ones meant to be erased. A name on the scroll means more than belonging. It means protection. The name binds you to the kingdom's memory, to its winds, to its laws, to its ancestral fire. Without a name on the scroll, a person might live but not truly. They become a shadow, untethered from the realm of story. Forgotten by history. Unmourned by the gods. But there is a darker rule rarely spoken. A name may be burned from the scroll. Not crossed out. Not removed with ink. Burned. To do so is to erase someone not just from record but from memory itself. When a name is burned, it curls from the scroll in smoke, and with it, all bonds to the kingdom vanish. Their name falls from the tongues of loved ones. Paintings blur. Footprints fade. Even the fire turns its face. It is called the law of erasure. And it is feared. Only once in a generation does it happen, and only then when the council is unanimous and the omen unquestionable. The fire rite is kept secret. The people never know who was erased. They only feel an absence, like a space in the heart that aches without reason. A silence where there should have been story. The girl, whose name had never been written in ink but only whispered in breath, had always been dangerous. But breath alone could not bind her. She was of the old tongue, the kind of name that bent wind and coaxed flame. The scroll had long resisted her, refusing to accept a name that could not be controlled. Yet still, she existed, and the kingdom had no defense against her save the memory of her presence. So when she came of age and the signs became undeniable, the frost that refused to melt for weeks, the dreams shared by children, the torch that lit without spark whenever her image was drawn, the council convened in the chamber of fire. 12 men and women, cloaked in ash-colored robes, gathered around the scroll beneath the temple. The girl had been sealed at the edge of the kingdom as far from the scroll's pull as possible, and yet she still stirred the ink. Still warped the memory of the land. Still returned to them in dreams. She is a fracture, one counselor said. She is a mirror, another replied. She shows us what we tried to bury. That's why we must burn her, said the high priest. Not to punish her. To forget her. And so the rite was prepared. The scroll was rolled out until its final edge, a place few had seen where the newest names shimmered faintly incomplete. There, in the margins, something had begun to take form. No scribe had written it. No tongue had spoken it aloud. But the shape of a name was emerging, coiling and sharp, like a flame caught in writing. The scroll was resisting and remembering her at once. The fire priest brought the ember blade, a dagger forged from star metal and blessed by the first silence. It could not cut flesh, only meaning. Its edge burned not with heat but with memory. The high priest stepped forward, raised the ember blade and placed it above the name. She was never written, one of the scribes said nervously. Her name was never given to us. The high priest's voice was steady. Then we burn the memory of her. We burn the echo. And with that he pressed the blade to the scroll. At first nothing happened. Then the scroll screamed. Not in sound. In stillness. The candles all blew out at once. The ink across the scroll darkened as though recoiling. The room dropped into shadow. The air trembled with a cold so sharp it made the fire priest stumble backward. And then, slowly, the name, not written, not whole, began to burn. The ember did not move in a line as with other names. It writhed. It fought. The flame danced in violent spirals, lashing against the page, striking at the hands that wielded the blade. The council stood frozen, watching as the fire curled and hissed, until finally the space where her name had begun was empty. Blank. The ink bled away. The air stilled. And silence fell. A silence unlike any they had known. Not peace. Absence. The scroll, once humming with soft warmth and pulse, went cold. Its surface dulled. The ink of other names grew faint. The entire record dimmed, as though a thread had been pulled from the center of its tapestry and the weave had come undone. The priest tried to speak a blessing, but the words dried in his throat. The scribe tried to write, but the quill snapped in his hand. No one could recall the name they had erased, not even those who had spoken it just minutes before. But some things resist forgetting. In the southern village, a woman woke screaming, her hands clutching her throat. At the edge of the kingdom, in the burned tree circle, the girl stood barefoot in snow, staring at the northern lights. Her breath came in slow streams, white against the night. Her hair whipped in a wind no one else could feel. The fire beside her roared to life. She did not move. She had felt it, the tearing, the attempt. They had tried to unmake her. But names like hers are older than ink. Older than fear. Older than scrolls and laws and fire rites. She looked up at the sky and spoke no words, yet something in the stars shifted. A constellation long forgotten shimmered back into shape. The wolves did not howl that night. They listened. Back in the capital, the scroll remained cold for 3 days. On the 4th, it pulsed once, a faint flicker at the burned edge. By the 5th, one letter had returned. Not in ink. In scorched script. Read. What? On the 6th, the scroll keepers heard whispering from the vault. And by the 7th, they no longer dared enter the chamber at all. After the scroll went dark and her name was burned from its memory, the girl vanished. Not in the way the council hoped. Not erased, not unmade, but vanished like mist pulled into the trees, like a spark swallowed by the wind. One moment she stood in the circle of blackened trees, watching the fire flare high around her feet, and the next there was only stillness. No footprints. No smoke. Just silence, wide and aching. The kingdom tried to move on. They said nothing of her. No proclamation. No mourning. No word of what had been done. The law of erasure was meant to seal away not only a person's name but their very shape and memory. Yet the act had left a wound and the land bled slowly. It began with the crops. The northern barley turned pale before its time, bending under its own weight and rotting in the fields. Vine fruit withered on the stem. The soil, once so fertile it sang when tilled, grew sour. Farmers tilled harder, prayed louder. The priests declared it was a punishment for hidden sins, for disloyal thoughts, for unspoken doubts. But the prayers did not help. The soil did not listen. Next came the rain. It didn't stop entirely, it just forgot when to fall. Weeks passed beneath cloudless skies and then, without warning, a storm would drown entire valleys. Rivers surged without warning. Floods came, then nothing. No pattern. No reason. As if the sky itself had grown uncertain. By the 2nd year, people began to notice the ash. Not from any fire. It drifted down gently from the hills, carried on the wind. Pale gray flakes, soft as breath. They never gathered enough to bury, but enough to dust rooftops, to catch in hair and lashes. And always when the ash fell, the world went quiet. Birds stopped calling. Dogs lay still. Even the wind seemed to listen for something. The silence unnerved them more than the ash. And then came the stories. At first, only children told them, half-scared, half-thrilled whispers shared beneath blankets or behind schoolhouse doors. They spoke of a girl with fire in her hands and no shadow behind her. A girl who stood at the edge of the hills and watched, unmoving, while a wolf pack fled from her heat. A girl who walked through a burning barn without a scratch, her eyes glowing red as coals. A girl who could not be named. Their parents silenced them. "Don't speak of her," they said. "There is no her." But even as they said it, their throats ached with doubt. And the children did not forget. In their dreams they saw her. They dreamed of a figure cloaked in flame, standing atop ridges that glowed with heat but bore no smoke. They saw her hands not burning but becoming fire, fingers flickering, palms trailing sparks. Her hair moved like smoke underwater, and her eyes, always her eyes, held something older than the kingdom itself. The children would wake gasping, the shape of her name still in their mouths, but the moment they tried to speak it, it slipped away. Like steam. Like breath on glass. They'd try again and again, lips forming sounds that made no sense. And when they finally gave up, they would fall back into sleep, heartbeats echoing in a rhythm that matched the silent scroll beneath the temple floor. Some of them drew her. Not with skill but with certainty. Red chalk. Black ash. A figure always alone, always surrounded by flame that did not consume her. The images spread, scratched into tree bark, carved on the backs of school desks, pressed into the dirt with bare hands. A warning? A promise? No one could say. In the outer villages, where the hills began to rise and the wind moved stranger, the whispers grew louder. She walks at dusk, they said. She leaves no tracks, only warmth. Crows gather when she passes. Fire bends toward her. She does not age. No one saw her clearly. No one could follow. Hunters who tried found themselves turned around, lost within miles of land they'd known since childhood. The animals sensed her first, deer freezing mid-step, birds veering off course. Dogs howled when no sound had stirred. And once, only once, a shepherd boy swore he saw her kneel at the river, the water boiling around her without bubbling. When he blinked, she was gone, but the stone where she had knelt was warm for days. The priests tried to discredit the rumors. They redoubled worship at the altars, burned incense until the temple itself choked on the smoke. They held ceremonies of forgetting, where the people were urged to let go of things they could not name. But the forgetting did not hold, because something was remembering for them. The scroll, still cold in its vault, had begun to whisper. Not in voices, not in words, but in flickers, faint pulses of heat that touched the fingertips of any scribe who dared approach it. At first they thought it malfunctioned. Then they realized, it pulsed only in the hours before dawn, only when the ash fell, only when the children dreamed. The head scroll keeper began to lose sleep. He walked with a candle lit at all times, muttering lines from old prayers. He claimed he saw letters forming in the burned margin of the scroll, not full names but pieces, curves and hooks, strokes that meant nothing yet felt known. He tried to copy them but the ink burned through every page. By the third year no one could pretend she had been erased. Even the council no longer met in the chamber of fire. The ember blade remained locked away, untouched. Its edge, once bright, had dulled, as though it had used up all its power trying to cut something uncuttable. The priests began using her name again in their dreams, unbidden, unwanted. They woke sweating, lips burnt. Some cut their tongues to stop themselves from speaking it in waking hours. Others vanished into the hills, seeking her in secret. None returned. The people began to speak carefully. Not of her, but around her. They used new phrases, the one the scroll remembers, she who fire refused, the name that could not be unmade. They hung charms over their doorways not to keep her out, but to let her know they remembered. Not her name, but her. A child, a girl of 10, drew a spiral in the dirt near the temple and said, "She's waiting for the sky to remember her." When asked what that meant, she said, "It means the world's forgetting is almost over." By the time the ash began to fall in midsummer, something that had never happened before, even the high priest stopped preaching. He stood at the altar, staring into the fire and said only, "We are not the authors we thought we were." And still she did not return. Not fully. She lingered. Like smoke that would not clear. Like the breath before a name is spoken. Like the warmth that remains after the fire is gone. Waiting. The scroll, long kept hidden beneath layers of stone and vow, had begun to bleed. At first the monks told no one. They were quiet men, trained in silence and ritual, tasked not with understanding the scroll but with guarding it, as one might guard a sleeping god. Each night, they lit the prayer lamps, changed the incense and knelt in stillness before the sacred text. And each morning they checked the scroll for tampering, rot, dust, moths. Always it had remained unblemished. Until the bleeding began. It was not blood, not truly, but something stranger. Thin black lines oozed from the base of the parchment, no wider than a thread, yet unmistakably alive. The ink ran without inkpot or brush, as if seeping from the fibers of the scroll itself. At first it was faint. A single dot on the edge. A curved hook where no name had ever been inscribed. But each night the ink returned, darker, thicker, more insistent. The monks prayed louder. They lit larger fires. They fasted for 7 days and scrubbed the floor until their fingers split. One monk tried to blot the scroll clean, but the cloth he used caught flame, and the heat did not burn the scroll, it burned him. They sent word to the high scriptorium, but no answer came. The fires around the capital had begun to act strangely, glowing even in the rain, flickering in unnatural rhythms. No one trusted flame anymore. No one trusted ink. And still the scroll bled. Then came the 7th night. It was the winter solstice, the coldest in living memory. Ice webbed across the temple windows, and the air tasted of iron. The monks entered the chamber for their vigil and found the scroll smoldering. Not burning, smoldering. A steady breath of red heat pulsed from its core, rising like fog from the ancient parchment. At the bottom of the scroll, where her name had once been nothing more than an echo, a new mark had appeared. It was not written. It had burned itself into the parchment. Not in black, but in blood-red ink that shimmered like hot coal. The name was whole now, not guessed, not whispered, but there. Clear. Alive. The letters curved and clawed across the page, breathing as if they were lungs pressed flat into script. The ink was still wet. Still hot. Her name. The name the wind had once carried. The name the council had feared. The name the fire had failed to erase. She had written herself back. Not with hand or tongue. Not with help. But through the blood of the land, through the breath of those who remembered her even when they did not know they were remembering. One monk tried to recite a rite of binding, a fireward, the kind used to seal dangerous spirits into objects. As soon as he spoke the first line, a soundless force knocked him backward. His palms blistered. The ink from the scroll had leapt to his skin like flame. Others tried water, cold iron, salt. The name did not resist. It simply did not care. By the second day word had spread. Not from the monks, they were sworn to silence, but from the scroll itself. Somehow people knew. The fire priests returned, summoned by panic. They came armed with ember blades, ritual ash, sacred brands. They approached the scroll like a sickness that could still be purged. The youngest of them, no more than 20, touched her name with a blade. It hissed once. Then the heat traveled up the steel and into his arm. He screamed. The blade dropped. His hand had been marked, not with flame but with her sigil. The same spiral of fire etched onto the bark of trees in the far hills. It could not be scrubbed. It could not be healed. The elder priest tried to cut the name away. He carved into the parchment with the sacred edge, slicing across the blood script. The scroll bled brighter. A spurt of heat knocked the candles from the walls. The chamber filled with red smoke, choking and bitter. When it cleared, the scroll was untouched. The cut was gone. The name remained, pulsing faintly with each breath of air. The priest fell back. She's taken root, one whispered. She's in the blood of the scroll. No, said another, trembling. She is the scroll now. In the days that followed, people began to remember. Not from stories, the stories had been erased, drowned, burned. No, they remembered her from the marrow. A grandmother stirring soup remembered the girl with the eyes like embers, the one she had once cradled for only a moment before the soldiers came. A stonemason mid-chisel suddenly stopped and wept, though he didn't know why. Only later, he saw he had carved her shape into the rock without meaning to. A flame curled into a woman's form. A mother, brushing ash from her child's hair, whispered a name she did not know, and her daughter smiled in her sleep. She had become part of them. Etched not into stories but into skin. Into rhythm. Into fire. The scroll was no longer just a record. It had become a doorway. Every time someone touched it, even in thought, they found her. In their dreams. In the warmth of their hands. In the silence between songs. She was no longer a girl cast out. She was the ember in the voice that could not be silenced. She was the flame in the ink that would not fade. And as her name spread again, not by proclamation but by breath and bone, things began to change. The wind returned to its patterns. The rain fell soft and regular. Crops began to sprout where none had dared to try. But the people did not cheer. They did not dance. They listened. They listened because they remembered what had happened when they forgot. They remembered how the silence had been broken. And they knew, this was not forgiveness. This was restoration. The girl, now a name once more, was not a symbol. She was not myth. She was not saint or queen or curse. She was a presence. A knowing. A reminder. The fire priests burned their robes. The council disbanded. The ember blade was returned to the earth. No one dared to remove her name again. And in the cities, the markets, the outer villages, a new tradition began. Children would write her name in ash on the first day of spring, not as ritual but as thanks. Not one of them could say where they learned it, but every one of them knew it was right. They did not return to the old scroll. It still pulsed faintly, locked in the vault where it had bled and burned and rewritten itself. It was sacred now, too dangerous to alter, too alive to command. It was no longer a record. It had become a witness. The monks did not touch it. They lit candles near it but offered no prayers. They whispered to it as one might whisper to a sleeping ancestor. It listened. But the kingdom needed something new. Something not built on forgetting. So they gathered, not just scribes and priests but farmers, midwives, weavers, children. They gathered in a great clearing where the mountains touched the horizon and the wind moved freely through grass and stone. There, under an open sky, they began to make the new scroll. Not in secret chambers. Not behind sealed doors. But in the wide air where the fire could breathe. The parchment was not stitched from bleached hide but crafted from threads of bark, ash, and dried river reed. Each strand was soaked in smoke water and bound by silence. It was not white but gray gold, flecked with charcoal dust and soft as worn linen. The ink was fire and ash. They built a pen of carved obsidian and they did not test it first. No test was needed. The hand that held it would write what must be written, and nothing more. She stood at the center of the clearing as the scroll was laid open across smooth stone. Her fire still trailed behind her, but it had softened. It no longer blazed with wrath or memory. It shimmered now like the breath of a hearth. Like the last light before sleep. She knelt. The silence deepened. And with no command, no proclamation, no ritual, she placed the tip of the fire pen to the scroll. Her name was the first written. This time it was not burned in haste or fear. It was written slowly. Each letter glowed, then settled. Ash curled behind the lines like smoke from incense. The stroke sang. Not aloud, but in the heart. When it was done, her name lay at the top of the scroll like a horizon. Not demanding. Not shouting. Just present. Just whole. No one bowed. No one clapped. They simply stood. And they wept. Because they knew, this was not just her name. This was a beginning. The council was gone. The old laws broken, scattered with the ashes of forgotten silences. In their place stood a single decree, unspoken but clear in every breath of wind. No name would ever be erased again. Even dangerous names. Even strange ones. Even those whispered with trembling or awe. They were sacred now. Because names, they understood at last, were not just symbols. They were seeds. And to erase a name was to salt the earth. So they taught the children to write carefully, not for beauty but for respect. They let the scroll remain outside. It was not placed in a vault or shrine. It was set on an altar of river stone, where the flame could touch it, and the wind could sing through its fibers. Each morning, someone from the village would place a bowl of water nearby, and each evening someone would leave a leaf, a petal, a coal. These were not offerings, they were acknowledgments. Every few days someone would come forward with a new name to add. There was no hierarchy. A child's name came after a baker's. A shepherd followed a midwife. Some names were spoken with pride. Others with pain. A few with trembling. But each was written. And none were ever removed. Not even those who wandered, betrayed, or broke the laws of men. Their names remained, not to honor them but to remember. The people had learned, forgetting was the first violence. Erasure the beginning of all ruin. So the scroll grew. It wound across the stone, then over the soil. The parchment was not limited by pages. It moved like a vine, weaving its names into an ever-expanding shape. Sometimes it circled trees. Sometimes it crossed rivers. It learned to breathe with the land. The people did not fear its growth. They welcomed it. And though no guards protected it, no one dared harm it. Not because of punishment, for there would be none, but because to harm the scroll was to harm themselves. Their own names were written there. Their memories. Their fire. In time the scroll taught them something new. When the wind passed through its fibers, it made a sound. Not speech. Not song. But memory. A vibration like a lullaby long forgotten. People began to gather just to listen. They sat in circles, backs to the scroll, eyes closed, and let the names speak. Some heard stories. Others wept without knowing why. A few stood suddenly and remembered something they'd thought lost. A name, a face, a word they'd once whispered to a fire. And so the scroll did more than record. Remembered. And memory, they came to understand, was a kind of justice. One morning, a girl no older than 7 approached the scroll and asked to write the name of someone who had never been born. Her mother had lost a child in silence, never spoken of. But the girl had heard the weeping. The scroll accepted the name. No one questioned it. Because absence too must be remembered. Later, a man who had once served the old council came forward. His name had never been burned. He had fled before the fire right. He knelt. Wrote his name in ash. And beside it wrote hers, the girl he had helped exile. Not to ask forgiveness. Only to tell the truth. The scroll accepted both. And the land softened again. The rivers cleared further. The harvest grew thick. The fire no longer flickered in fear. It danced. And through it all she remained. Not as queen or goddess or ruler. But as presence. She walked among them. Sometimes in flame. Sometimes in cloak and bare feet. sometimes unseen, known only by the way birds paused in their flight or how the smoke curled differently from a lantern. She did not need to speak. The scroll now spoke for her. It whispered in flame and ash that every name matters. That silence is not the enemy, only silence enforced. That memory, like fire, must be fed, tended, and never denied. In this kingdom, when a child lights a fire for the first time, they are taught a name. Not as a command. Not as a warning. But as a blessing. They speak it softly with a breath against the kindling, like a whisper to an old friend. Her name, the one once burned, once forbidden, once erased. And the flame listens. Sometimes it flares brighter, a spark rising like laughter. Sometimes it curls inward, glowing low and steady as if nodding. Either way the fire responds. It always has. Because she is still here. Not as a ghost, not as a queen, but as presence. She lives in the pause between sparks. In the warmth that holds through the night. In the hush that comes when fire sings low and no one dares speak above it. Children know her best. They sing her name in lullabies, the kind with no real words, only hums and half-syllables passed down from mothers and older siblings. They draw her symbol in the ashes beside hearths. A spiral. A flicker. A single unbroken line that means, remember me, and do not fear. When soldiers march to defend the land, not for conquest but for protection, her story is etched into the leather of their armor. Not with swords but with heated irons and old ink. A reminder that fire can protect as well as destroy. That memory is the strongest shield. They say her name before battles. Not for victory. But to remind themselves what must never be done again. When flames rise too high in the summer winds, and forests groan beneath the heat, the elders do not panic. They watch the smoke, close their eyes and say, she is near. Not as wrath. Not as punishment. But as a message. Because when fire becomes too much, they know it is not wildness. It is warning. A signal that something is being forgotten. That silence is no longer being chosen but forced. That names are being spoken less or remembered wrongly or worse, buried. And so they gather. Not with water alone. But with stories. They tell the old tale again. The one of the girl born under the red moon. The one whose name cracked stone. The one who was exiled, erased, and yet returned, not with vengeance but with flame that healed. They speak it not to glorify her but to keep her real. Because her story is not myth. It is memory. And memory, they have learned, is sacred. In schools, children are taught to write their names in fire ash ink once a year. Not for record-keeping but for reflection. They sit in circles, dip carved quills into the flame-colored dust, and write carefully on scrolls that will not be archived, but read aloud, then return to the fire. To burn a name now is not erasure. It is offering. A promise that it will return when needed. Some names are lost, yes. That is the way of things. Time forgets. Wind carries. But hers does not fade. Hers returns always at the edge of windstorms, in the hush before snow, in the flickering light just before dawn. And whenever injustice stirs again, whenever fear returns in the mouths of leaders who speak of safety through silence, or peace through forgetting, her name flares. It appears on doors in red soot, in water bowls trembling, on the surface of glass misted with breath. A warning. Not with rage but with memory. Because she was not only a girl. She became a mirror. She became the fire within. And that fire lives now in the people. Not just in their homes but in their bones. In the girl who refuses to be quiet when others demand her stillness. In the boy who carries a burned scroll fragment in his coat pocket, just to feel its warmth. In the mother who names her child after someone the world tried to forget. In the elder who sits beside a hearth and tells the tale not as myth, but as history. And even now, long after the council fell, long after the scroll began to stretch like a root across the land, some say she walks still. They say she is the flicker in the corner of the eye. The warmth behind you on a windless night. The figure just beyond the tree line when a name is nearly lost. She does not need to return in full. Because she never truly left. Her name, once burned from the scroll, rewrote itself. And in doing so it rewrote them all. So now when the flames rise too high. When justice tilts and silence becomes sharpened again. When the old hunger for forgetting stirs beneath robes or laws or holy words. The people gather. They hold ash in their palms. They speak her name aloud. And the fire answers. Not with wrath. Not with destruction. But with light. The kind that blinds only those who refuse to see. In the softened light of dusk, across the ridges of the once-burned kingdom, children crouch beside hearths, their small hands cupped around kindling and ember. The old ones show them how to strike flint or coax sparks from coals carried from the village center. But it is the children who light the flame. It is the children who speak her name. Not loudly. Not with ceremony. Just a whisper, gentle as breath, sure as memory. Her name is not shouted into the dark. It is offered to the fire as a friend might offer a secret. They speak it as blessing, not superstition. Because long ago, before their grandparents were born, her name was forbidden. Burned from the scroll. Torn from memory. But fire remembers. And fire does not forget. Now, whenever a flame is lit, whether in homes or temples, in festival fires or simple stoves, her name is the first word the flame hears. No one commands this. It is not law. It is instinct. It is the way of things now. Her story is taught before letters. It is etched into the walls of schools and carved into gateposts with coils of smoke and wind. The weavers thread her mark, the spiral of fire, the incomplete circle, into children's cloaks and festival banners. Her name is never alone. It travels in story. It is sung in lullabies and battle songs alike. Soft, haunting melodies pass from mouth to mouth, changing slightly in each voice but always holding the same fire. Mothers sing of her to restless children, their voices low and humming. She was flame, she was wind, she was ash that rose. No child forgets the rhythm even when they grow. And in the fields or on the roads, where soldiers walk not for conquest but to protect the quiet, her name is carved into the wood of their spears and sung beneath their breath. They do not ask her to bless their blades. They ask only to remember, to walk in fire, not to burn but to endure. When flames rise too high in summer months, curling wild and red across the dry ridges, the elders gather and nod. She is near, they say. And no one panics. They do not call it wrath. They do not flee in guilt. They watch. They listen. For the fire carries messages and hers are never sent in cruelty. She does not destroy without cause. She walks, they say, when something has been forgotten, when silence has grown cold and tight again, not chosen but forced. The people know the signs. The smoke curls in old shapes, spiraling toward the air like a memory trying to climb. Wind carries whispers not heard with ears but with the skin. The ground grows warm beneath bare feet. Then someone, always someone, remembers. A name. The truth. A silence that went too long. And the fire begins to calm. They do not need to find her. They do not need to beg. They only need to remember. To speak her name once more. Injustice still tries to rise sometimes. There are always those who fear truth, who long for neat scrolls and blank spaces, for laws that flatten and histories that forget. Sometimes they come with quiet voices and kind eyes, speaking of peace. Sometimes with sharp commands. They try to convince the people. Some names are too dangerous to keep. But the people remember. And when such words are spoken, when someone dares suggest the fire be tamed, the scroll shortened, the names limited again, something happens. Her name flares. Not metaphorically. It appears. In soot upon doorways. In the steam that curls on mirrors. In the ring of ash around the scroll that lies still beneath open sky. Always the same. Her name burned bright. Not screaming, simply present. Like breath held just before thunder. Like a blade too hot to touch. A warning. It never burns the speaker. But it silences the lie. And the people gather. They do not riot. They do not banish. They remember. And memory, they know, is sharper than law. Her name is their shield now. Not a charm. Not a tool. But a vow. In classrooms, teachers do not only recite her tale, they ask the children what it means. And the children answer differently but always truly. She taught us not to forget. She came back when they tried to silence her. She was fire that didn't want to hurt, only be seen. The scroll, the one born after the burning, still lies beneath the stars. It no longer needs to be added to often. Most names are remembered without ink. But the scroll is still visited. People kneel beside it not to write but to listen. Because sometimes the fire still speaks. Sometimes in the soft crackle of coals or the hiss of sap in wood, her voice is there. Not words exactly, but presence. An echo of heat behind the heart. A stillness between beats. She is not a queen. She never ruled. But she governs now in the way the wind governs the edge of cliffs, or the way fire teaches caution without needing to shout. Some say she walks still, in forests untouched by path, in the curl of smoke from the highest peak, in the moment when a child dares speak the unspeakable and is not punished. Others say she has become the fire itself. Not the flame that burns but the spark. The thing that comes before. The thing that refuses to die. No one agrees on what she looks like now. Some see a woman cloaked in ash. Others a girl with ember eyes and soot on her cheeks. Some swear she has no body at all, only light and breath. But all agree she is not gone. She is watching. She is listening. And whenever a name is threatened, whenever someone dares to erase again, to silence again, her name rises. Not with fury, but with certainty. She comes as fire comes, without apology. Not to destroy but to reveal. Not to punish but to remember. Not to burn, unless burning is the only way left to speak. So the people tend their hearts with care. They teach the young to name things gently, to listen between silences, and to trust the warmth that comes with truth. Because the fire is within them now. Because her name, once forbidden, lives in every breath they take beside flame. Because once long ago they tried to erase her. And the fire wrote her back.